Well, thank you very much. I'm thinking I want to move to the Verde Valley in the month of March and spend it here and with all the things going on. I think you have more things going on than we do in Tucson. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you all for coming out. I did some calculations, 13,000 years. I figure I'm going to have to cover 200 years a minute to get this done. So hang on, because it's going to go pretty fast. So anyway, thank you all for being here. This is based on the last 30 years of research I've done in this area that many of you know was just mentioned as Homolovi. But it's also going to mix in the work we've done the last 5 years at Rock Art Ranch. And I know a trip is being planned for the end of June, so that will be to come up and see us. So if you want to get out of the hot valley of Verde Valley up to the cool plateau of Winslow, you can come on up. This is a map of the Rock Art Ranch area, where in blue, where we're doing work. And I know you people in the back probably have no clue what I'm talking about up here, but it gives you an idea of where it is with respect to the Homolovi sites. And we've been, as I said, working there the last 5 years. We've done excavations on 2 small Pueblos. I'll talk a little bit more about those. Probably the most interesting thing we've been working on is the survey of the ranch. Rock Art Ranch is owned by Brantley Baird, and we're doing a partnership with him in terms of helping him understand the archaeological record there so he can improve his tours that he does there, he and his family. This shows the survey area we've done, all on the ranch. We've surveyed about 5 or 6 square miles, and we've recorded about 180 sites. This is Chevelon Canyon. If you have not been to the ranch, this is where the petroglyph site is located, and that is water. It's fed by a number of springs up a couple of miles above the ranch, and it has a permanent flow of water in it, and all the plants in it are indigenous plants. Karen Adams, who many of you know because she's helped you with some of the work that you've done with the material you have here, has come through and done the inventories, and we work closely with her in developing inventories of all the plants on the ranch and in the canyon. And this gives you an idea of where the petroglyphs are, where this building is that Brantley has built. These are archaic petroglyphs. Most of you know Don Weaver, or probably knew Don Weaver. He did the actual, he led the recording of the petroglyphs, which there are a little over 3,000 in this canyon. And he estimated they went back as early as 6,000 BC. This is some of the Baskmaker II early agricultural petroglyphs there. This is where the archaeological sites are. 175, I guess that's how many we have. 175 sites on the ranch. The Chevelon Canyon is over on this side, and there are a couple of smaller canyons that the sites are mostly situated along. And these are the pre-ceramic sites. So we have about 80 plus pre-ceramic sites. And what that means is pottery shows up about AD 500 in this area. So all of these sites predate that. And the reason I wanted to do work at Rock Art Ranch is because the petroglyphs there are primarily pre-ceramic age. And I was interested in finding out where the people who were making those petroglyphs, where were they living, what were they doing, how much time did they spend there, what resources were they seeking there. I had no idea that we would find 80 or more of these sites. And I'll show you some of the projectile points that we have to give you some sense of the age of these things, which is really what a lot of it's based on. So this is fabulous Chimney Canyon. Canyon is probably maybe an overused word here, but it's got some water-dependent plants growing in it. A deeper and more robust canyon is Belka Canyon, and you can see the plants growing in here. These are cottonwoods, black walnuts, trees such as that. And what this suggests in both of these, what apparently are dry canyons, is that there's a lot of water actually underneath the sand in these canyons. A geologist friend of mine and I excavated some trenches in both of the canyons, and we basically found a stream about 1.5 meters down. It's completely full of water. So there's a tremendous reservoir of water literally in this area. And so the reason we have so many of these pre-ceramic sites near these canyons is because they could just dig a well down and get water anytime they wanted. Now this is going to be a really tough one for those of you who went back to see. But basically these are the projectile points. We have 215 projectile points that we picked up off the ranch in 5 years. They range from Clovis to Pueblo. And amazingly enough, we have 29 of those points that are paleo points, which means that they're generally over, say, 9,000 years old, 8,000 to 9,000 years old. I didn't really expect to find that many paleo points. This is a sort of a small sampling of the ones that we found this last summer. And the two in the upper left are Clovis bases, and there are others which will be identified later on. So we have a 13,000-year history of use. Clovis dates from about 13,200 to 12,700 years ago. Those are the people that were hunting mammoths, as well as other megafauna. These are the projectile points as they're distributed in the survey area. And again, they're concentrated. This is Bell Cow Canyon over here. They're really concentrated in this deeper canyon where the water is more abundant, where they could, when they acquire corn about for at least 3,000 years ago, they could have been doing some farming in the area. And then this is the petroglyph site right here. We haven't made it to the petroglyph site in terms of our survey. We found so many sites that we were really kind of bogged down. In the last 2 years, we've surveyed about one section, and we've found 90 sites on it, almost all pre-ceramic. And some of these sites cover acres. So it's a nice problem to have, I must say. These are the material types, and the reason the material type is interesting to us is it tells us a little bit about where the people who are bringing these points in, where the resources, the quarries or the places that the material might be coming from, gives us a sense of the direction they're coming from, the distance that they may be carrying some of these points. I won't go through what all the colors mean, but each one is a different material type. About 2/3 of the points are chert, about 1/3 of them are petrified wood, more or less. And you probably know that the petrified forest is about 25-30 miles east of the ranch. That's where that material is coming from. So the reason that this is kind of a simplified version of the points, and I will explain it to you because probably about 75% of you can't read it from where you're sitting. This is points stylistically that come from the northwest. They're concentrated mostly in the middle Archaic to late Archaic period, which is, say, about 6,000 years ago to about 3,000 years ago. The northeastern direction is where all of our paleo points, for the most part, are coming from. Clovis is primarily east or north, coming from either the north or the east. There are a lot of Clovis points, say, in the Rio Grande. a lot of very large sites in the Rio Grande. But we also have Scotts Bluff points, Plainview points, and things like that. From the south and southeast, the concentration of points are primarily coming from southeastern Arizona, what are called San Pedro points. And then the early and middle Archaic is kind of a mixture of people coming from all over the place. So I want to talk a little bit about these, what the meaning of these things are. So these are our Paleoindian points, concentrated kind of over near the deeper canyons. I think what they were doing, the canyons are about 20 meters deep or so. I think probably bison, ancient bison, other animals were probably moving in to get the water. And the Clovis points and the other paleo points are all along the edges of these deep canyons. And they were probably just hunting these animals in the canyons who couldn't escape. The material types are a lot of petrified wood, and this, as well as chert, but most of the chert is not local chert. So here, the two Clovis points are actually both petrified wood, probably coming from the petrified forest area, 25, 30 miles away. This is a Plainview point and an Eden point. Both are middle to late Paleoindian. Both are made of non-local chert. In fact, the chert probably comes from either Texas or eastern New Mexico. So I have people coming from long distances or not so long distances, and either using fairly local materials or bringing materials from a long way away. But people are moving across the landscape, and we're trying to trace them through the point types and the types of materials they're using. So from the Paleoindian period, we have three Great Basin stem points, which are from the Great Basin, but they also go up into Oregon and Washington and places like that. We have three of those. Those could be as old as Clovis points, almost, or certainly Paleoindian age. The 10 of the paleo points are coming from probably the Great Plains traditions for the most part. And then we have the three Clovis points we have. I didn't show you one of them because it's not actually on the ranch, but from Chevelon, Pueblo, they're all petrified wood. So those people, although they may be coming from a fair distance away, they're using local materials to refurbish whatever points they lose along the way. From the Archaic tradition, which is about 8,000 to 3,000 years old, that's where we have the most of our points. We have 70-some points from this period. And this is some of the examples. These are Bajada points. This is early Archaic. These are Pinto points and San Jose points. Those are middle Archaic. This is a northern side notch point. San Pedro points. These are related to the agricultural traditions of southeastern Arizona. The San Pedro River actually runs just to the east of Tucson, and that's what this point type is named after. I'll talk more about that later. And then gypsum points, which is right here, those come from the west. So the Pinto and the gypsum points are from the western deserts, the Mojave, eastern California. And this is the material types, again, primarily chert, but we also have quite a bit of petrified wood. The tremendous concentration of early and middle Archaic points over on this side of the canyon. And I'll get into why they're there in just a minute. These are some of the Bajada points. Again, this is petrified wood. This is a non-local chert, and this is a local chert. So in the early and middle Archaic, we have groups, 18 of the points that we have come from the west in terms of tradition. 26 of them come from the east, and 3 of them come from the Great Basin from the north. So we have groups that are coming into this area with their point traditions, and whether we have no idea if they're there at the same time because we don't have any dates other than the points themselves from this period. We've been excavating burned features, but they're frustratingly all agricultural period, Basket Maker II period. These are some of the middle and late Archaic points. Again, San Jose, Pinto, and northern side notched. Let me tell you, you never get tired of finding points on survey, believe me. We have a field school. We have 16, 17 students that come out with us every summer from all over the United States. And they just can't believe when they find a projectile point on the landscape that that's even possible. You can, if you found one, you can probably remember very clearly the first one you found and what a transformative experience it was. Can you imagine finding a Clovis point or a Plainview point or something like that? And as you can see, a lot of the points are whole. The amazing thing is that Brantley Barrett has lived on that ranch for 70 years, and he's an avid projectile point collector, not surprisingly. How could he miss 200 and some points? I can only guess how many must have been on the landscape when he started out there. I think it's amazing anybody's lived in one place for 70 years on a ranch. The early agricultural Basket Maker II groups, these are people who have corn. Corn shows up. We have the earliest dates we have for corn in this area, this immediate area, is about 800 BC. It probably is earlier than that because it's earlier, not too far away in the Zuni area, for instance. They have corn that goes back to 1800 BC. So, there's probably some earlier. We would never expect to have find the earliest. But anyway, these early agricultural people are still really focused over here along this fairly large bell cow canyon. And these are the points that they're using, the San Pedro points in particular. And those groups of people are coming either from, projectile point tradition-wise, either from southeastern Arizona or from the Rio Grande area in terms of the types of points that they're making. And a lot of those points are non-local chert. Some of them are igneous rocks, which would suggest they came from the Mogollon Rim area, and some are petrified wood. And then these are the dates from the burned features that we've excavated over the last 5 years. The earliest one is 822 BC, which is right up in here. This is a pit house we excavated in the 90s with the Huckles, Bruce and Lisa Huckle, and they've got some corn that dates about as early as 815 BC. But all of our radiocarbon dates from these sites that don't have any pottery on them date to the Basket Maker II period, 800 BC to 500 AD, and we have 7 dates. So that's when the really intensive use of the rock art ranch was taking place. So one of the ideas that's been in the literature for since the 70s. This is an article that Cynthia Irwin Williams, was published in 2007, but one that she wrote about in the 70s, is the idea of a group of early agriculturalists from Mexico and southeastern Arizona who migrated up into the eastern part of Arizona, what's called the San Pedro Cochise culture. And the reason that they argue that this is a likely source for people moving up into the areas where Rock Art Ranch is, pit houses look very similar, the western Basket Maker to the area around Tucson. Their points are identical. And in dry caves, in both southeastern Arizona and in eastern Arizona, up in the plateau. The basketry is made identically. It's a 2-rod and bundle foundation, and it's quite different than the eastern basket maker Colorado Plateau Archaic, which is basically New Mexico and Colorado. So their argument is, on the basis of all these similarities, points, basketry, pit house style, that a group brought agriculture from southeastern Arizona up onto the plateau about 4,000 years ago. And we find the same point styles that we find in the Tucson area. They're identical. The San Pedro projectile points, we have about 20 of them. And they all date to the Basket Maker II period. So, we can certainly support that argument, but there are a lot of people who don't buy that argument. But archaeologically, we find evidence that supports that argument. The other thing that we have that's interesting, I've shown you the petroglyphs in Chevelon Canyon, the archaic ones here, Basket Maker II ones here. On the San Juan River in southeast Utah, we have very similar petroglyphs. This is a Basket Maker II, and these are archaic petroglyphs. People like Sally Cole, who some of you may know or have heard of, Polly Shaftsma see a direct correlation in terms of style between the people in the middle Little Colorado River Valley and people living up in southeastern Utah, northeastern Arizona. Basically, they're making the same petroglyphs over a several thousand-year period in the two areas. Probably represents a movement of people from southeastern Utah into the middle of the Colorado River area. So the petrified forest has these same sort of petroglyphs, a little bit east of the petrified forest. Basically, Chevelon area is about the farthest west in the Little Colorado that we find these. So what this suggests is that, again, in this sort of archaic to Basket Maker II period, we have some traditions of people, and literally people coming down from the north, that Utah-Arizona boundary, from the points and other things that we find, the types of non-local Cherts, we have suggestions of people literally migrating up from the southeast. And then the petrified wood that we find suggests that groups are coming from the petrified forest and using this area. Keep in mind, all through this period, these from 13,000 years ago to AD 500, these people are mobile people. They're not staying in one place. Even these people who are practicing agriculture, they don't stay in that place year-round. They are moving around. So it would make sense that people in the Rock Out Ranch area might have spent part of their year over in the petrified forest area. There's a huge Basket Maker II settlements over in that area, as well as up on Black Mesa. The other thing that is quite remarkable about this area, other than the projectile points, is we have recovered 1,500 pieces of ground stone on the surface. Ground stone meaning metates and monos, 1,500. These are about 90% of, over 90% of these are one-hand monos or basin metates. Basically, those are Basket Maker II archaic style monos and metates. The trough metates show up around 500 AD, and we have very few of those. Let's see, we have 6. So 6 out of 1,500, that's very few. And this is where they are in the landscape. Well, we have survey crews that have GPS units with them, so we point locate every artifact we find on the landscape. If it's a single sherd, if it's a single piece of flake stone, if it's a single piece of ground stone, every one of those is recorded. So all the isolates are recorded, as well as things that we call sites, which are concentrations of these things. So we have 5,000 points on the landscape, basically, of artifacts. These are the ground stone, and not surprisingly, they're concentrated. These are the two canyons. They're concentrated along Chimney, but especially along Bell Cow Canyon, suggesting a really intensive grinding of seeds. In addition to groundstone, we also have bedrock grinding features, sometimes dozens of basin metades basically in the bedrock and the sandstone along these canyons. Karen Adams has recorded 14 different varieties of grass that are still growing on Rock Art Ranch. We have found no corn in any of the burned features that we have excavated. Doesn't mean it's not there, but we've excavated 7 burned features. So far, none of them have corn, although it's from the Basketmaker II period when they're growing corn. It's quite possible that these people are basically coming into this area as part of their seasonal round in the spring or in the, say, August, September, after the rains, and harvesting the seeds from all these different varieties of grass. And, these 1,500 pieces of ground stone spread over 1,500 years, that's one per year. So, it looks really intensive. It doesn't mean that there were, 100 people there at one time. And it might not have been every year. It might have depended very much on what the rainfall and those sorts of things were. So, but whatever, I think the primary activity of the people, certainly in the last 3,000 years, was probably grinding grass rather than corn. The other thing that we have done is we've looked at the flake stone material on the site, a number of the sites that we've collected, survey sites, to see if the stuff that, when they're actually active on the landscape, if that flake stone material is different than the points that we find. And in fact, it is. We find actually over 70% of the flake stone is local chert, followed by petrified wood, which is about 16%. So when they're there, they're using the local resources, the local cherts, which there's a little quarry area that they can use where it has a lot of chert on it. They're using that, which is quite different than the projectile points, which are coming from long distances in terms of the material. So when they're there, they're using the local sources, but they're traveling there from some distance because their projectile points are not from this area. And they're really intensively using these things. This just is kind of a size versus weight distributions of the flake stone, the chert, the petrified wood. Petrified wood is actually being more intensively utilized, but that's to be expected because it's not a local resource. It's coming from 25 or so miles away. So they're going to be using that more intensively because they can't replenish it by just walking a quarter of a mile or so away. We also accidentally found a Basketmaker II pit house while we were digging a Pueblo. It's a nice thing to find. Unfortunately, it had a central feature, but back in the day, Brantley made the mistake of letting a local pod hunter on his site, on his ranch, and he dug backhoes all through this Pueblo, took a backhoe and just dug the heck out of it. And so there's a backhoe trench that goes right through the edge of this and right into the center of it. But there was never any hearth in this Basketmaker II feature. So we have no charcoal from it, so we don't really know the exact age of it. There's also a very large bell-shaped pit associated with it as well, which didn't have anything in it either. We collected pollen out of it, which we have not yet run. But this certainly indicates that people were living out there for some period of time. And then this is an example of the features that we find out there in the pre-ceramic sites. This is a roasting pit with lots of charcoal in it. And I can hardly read this, but there is actually a date up there. This one is 88 BC to 57 AD is the range of the radiocarbon date. So about 2,000 years old. Okay, enough of those darn pre-ceramic archaeology. I want to move now into that exciting ceramic period that we can actually really date things to. This is the pre-Homolovi Pueblo occupation. So the big Pueblos at Homolovi begin to be occupied about 1260 at Homolovi 4. But there was a lot going on before those Pueblos were established. And we're finding out, one of the other things we wanted to do when we went to Rock Art Ranch was to learn a little more about the people before the Pueblos, people to the south. So here are the Homolovi sites. This is where we're doing work. And what we've found is that there are groups of people coming in to the Rock Art Ranch area from the north, from the east, and from the south. The people from the south are the Mugione groups, characterized by brown ware pottery and basically no decorated pottery tradition. Pueblo groups, which have gray wares and white wares. Puerco Valley groups, which have some red wares, kind of grayish, brownish utility wares. And believe it or not, these are the Basket Maker 3 Pueblo 1 sites. We have a pretty good occupation in this period. So Basket Maker 3 Pueblo 1 dates about AD 500 to, say, 850. We have pretty good use of it. Notice how it's distributed across the landscape. It's very different than the pre-ceramic, which was really concentrated on the canyons. These people are farmers. These people are growing corn. And so a lot of the sites are in farming areas. So this is kind of a little farming area. There are more farming areas up here, meaning that they can rainfall farm in those areas. But they're also still concentrated, the habitation sites, pretty close to the canyons because that's, again, where they can dig down and get water. And these people are building pit houses. So they need to, if they're going to build a pit house, you actually have to have some soil to dig it into. So they're up on these mesa areas near the canyons. These are not pots that we've found, but this gives you an idea of the pottery tradition. Lino, black on gray, Kanaa. We find a lot of that. In fact, we have a pretty good sized Basket Maker 3, early Pueblo 1 occupation there. These people are coming from the north. These are Pueblo people. These are ancestral Hopi, if you want to put it that way. This is the tradition of Pueblo people. Gray ware, utility wares, black on white pottery, or black on gray. So people who are in the Rock Art Ranch area during this period are from the north. During Pueblo 2 and Pueblo 3, we have a whole different situation going on. This is pottery from these sites. These sites are the two sites that we've excavated up there. And we're going to be back excavating in one of those again this summer. This is the assemblage laying on the ground. Black and white pottery, lots of brown utility wares, and some gray utility wares. The utility wares suggest that these people are basically Mugione people. They're coming from the south, but they're building small pueblos. But they don't make decorated pottery. They have an aversion, for some reason, to decorating their pottery. So they trade with the people up in the Hopi Buttes area, near the Hopi Mesas, for all the decorated pottery. which is what you find down in this area. You find walnut black on white. That's what basically these people are using, walnut black on white, which dates about 1125 to 1230 or thereabouts. So during Pueblo II and Pueblo III, the people from the north aren't in this area any longer. It's the people from the south who've migrated into this area. We don't know exactly where from. We're doing some petrographic and neutron activation analysis, or will be this spring, to try to get a better handle on where some of this pottery is coming from. But anyway, so we have people, different points in time coming from different areas. And this is what the little Pueblo will be working on this summer. This is a Ramada area. This is wall fall. You can probably figure that out by looking at it. These are rooms. Unfortunately, the backhoe has done a lot of damage to the site. So this is kind of the best preserved area we have of this Pueblo. We have 5 radiocarbon dates off of it that dated occupation to 1225 to 1255. 1255 is 5 years before Homolovi 4 was founded. This is a little Kiva-like thing that is a little ways away from the Pueblo. Same dates. It's got a ramp entry on the southeast, and a little hearth in this area, completely devoid of any artifacts. It's got this is bedrock, basically, that they built it down to. It's got little walls around it. And it's about 2 feet deep, I suppose, maybe a little. So it had mostly, it was mostly above ground. Prior to 1260, all settlements were small. We've recorded about 7 pueblos on or near Rock Art Ranch. The biggest one probably has 10 or 12 rooms. So they were occupied by 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 households. Groups, which we'll see in a second here, there are 2 pueblos. In the Homolovi area, where the park is, we have groups coming from both the north and the southeast who are settling in the Homolovi area just before the big pueblos are built. Some of those groups are coming from the north, the Hopi Buttes area, which is 50 kilometers north. One pueblo was built by these same Mogollon groups. So they were basically cheek and jowl in the Homolovi State Park area, people from both the north and the south. The ones from the north are right by the visitor center. So if you go to the visitor center at the park and you walk outside, there's a little trail, and it'll take you to what we call HP 36. That is a group of people that came from the Hopi Buttes. They are still living in pit houses into the 1200s. Ironically, the Cresswell Pueblo up here, this is Homolovi 2, so it's pretty close to Homolovi 2. It's out in the floodplain. Cresswell Pueblo is a Mogollon, built by Mogollon people. It's a Pueblo. It's kind of backwards from what we think of as Pueblo people. We think they live in Pueblos. These people lived in pit houses. This is Cresswell Pueblo. Probably was occupied mostly in the early 1200s. I know it's kind of hard to see, but there are a number of very large rooms. Mogollon people loved big rooms. So you can just walk out on one of these sites and you can look at the size of the room and you can tell whether they're from the north or the south. Mogollon people built big rooms. They're from the mountains. They're used to having big pieces of wood to build their rooms with. Pueblo people, like the Homolovi sites, the rooms are tiny. They're a third the size of it. These are 4 meters on a side, over 4 meters. 4 meters, 13, 14 feet. Pretty good sized. This is, and there were two pit structures here. There are kivas or kiva-like things. This is poor little HP 36. Has a bunch of pit structures, pit houses. They built 2, maybe 3 rooms. The walls, the standing walls are about maybe not quite to my knees, and that's all the higher the walls were. And most of the rest was a call. So this is what those people were living in, people at HP 36 in the early 1200s. Square to rectangular pit houses, very small. They're about 2.5 meters on the side, and they had ventilator systems and things like that. So very different traditions that they're basically living next to each other. They easily could have been contemporary. So now the Homolovi occupation. So what we have discovered in some of the recent work we're doing is that we've originally argued, I'm sure you've read all my books and know this already, but in case you haven't, we've argued that most of the people who settled these Homolovi sites came from the Hopi mesas, from communities up there that were already occupied, because all the darn pottery that we find there, the decorated pottery, is basically coming from or looks exactly like the pottery that we find, decorated pottery we find in the Homolovi sites. But we just kind of very inappropriately kind of ignored the utility wares. That's what we do, unfortunately. We often enjoy, if you have yellow wares, have you seen yellow wares? They're very pretty. They kind of distract you. You kind of forget they're utility wares because you can do so many things with yellow wares. So fortunately, I have a very driven graduate student working on her PhD, and she started looking at the utility wares, and what we found is, especially at Chevelon, there are a lot of Mogollon brown wares actually in the Pueblo of Chevelon. About 25% of the utility wares are actually Mogollon brown wares, and what we call Homolovi gray and orange wares, which is the local pottery produced in this area. Part of it, at least a fourth to maybe a third of that pottery is probably being made by people who learned how to make pottery in the Mogollon tradition versus all the rest of it, which was being made by people who were trained in the Pueblo tradition. So we actually, because Mogollon people don't make decorated pottery, we kind of miss them by not looking at the undecorated pottery. It's kind of like Apache and Navajo, especially Apache. They didn't make much pottery. There were sites all over the place, but we can't see them very well because they look a lot like pre-ceramic sites. Anyway, Homolovi, these are we've included an 8th one here, a little adobe Pueblo, which is right by Homolovi 1. These are the 7 main Pueblos. They date basically 1260 to 1400. You can see a couple of them have over 1,000 rooms, Homolovi 2 and Homolovi 1. We spent about 20 years digging in 5 of these for the most part. And we got several million artifacts. The problem with digging in big Pueblos occupied for a long time is there's a lot of trash. So we are still working through that. So this is what I was talking about. This is the Tucson polychrome. This comes from northern Arizona. And the local Winslow orange ware bears a lot of decorative similarities to this. So this suggests that either people came from the north or that they learned their decorative styles from people from the north. This is the work that the graduate student is working on. This is the Tucson corrugated tradition, the Pueblo tradition up at the Hopi Mesas. And this is the Mogollon tradition. And you can see, when you look at them in detail, they're pretty different. She calls this peaks and valleys and these parallelograms. The other thing that the Mogollon people do is they corrugate it and then they smear it or obliterate it. So this is called obliterated corrugated. This is a Tucson corrugated here. This is the local tradition. This was made in the Homolovi Pueblos, but it's actually made in a Mogollon style. The other thing that we look at is the kivas. We've excavated 26 kivas in the various Homolovi sites, and this is from Homolovi 3. These are looms, loom anchors here. Almost every kiva has multiple loom anchors. Why do you think that is? They were weaving, and they were weaving cotton. About 30 to 40%, well, over 30% of our flotation samples have cotton in them. That's a higher percentage than they find in the Hohokam area. They were growing prodigious amounts of cotton in this area, and so this is what it would have looked like with the setup of the loom. That's what these holes are. And just to get some sense of how much kiva form and function, how important it is, kivas are made a certain way. You don't randomly just say, well, let's build something and call it a kiva, and let's do this over here and that over there. It doesn't really matter. It matters a great deal. Just like the way churches are structured, or synagogues, or cathedrals, or whatever. They're not randomly laid out. So this is a kiva from the San Pedro River Valley, just east of Tucson, from a site called Davis Ranch. This dates to the early 1300s. Look at those loom holes. It's a kiva. It was made by Pueblo people who migrated from northern Arizona, first into the Mogollon Rim country, and then into the San Pedro area, and they brought with them kiva technology as well as pottery technology. So kivas matter. How they're made, how they're designed makes a difference. This is one of my favorite photos. You can tell it's exhausting digging a great kiva. This is 8 meters across, about 25, 26 feet. The river, the Little Colorado River, destroyed the rest of this. It's in the floodplain, Homolovi 3. It was built in the floodplain because at the time the river wasn't flooding. It was entrenched. This was during the Great Drought in the late 1200s. About 1300, 1305, the river started flooding again. So this kiva and several of the rooms were full of mud. They'd been basically buried right on the floor. So those people got flooded out, literally. And this is kind of what that kiva would have looked like. Again, these are underground structures. So we have a lot of common traits that are shared, and for the most part, the kivas, the pottery, the way the rooms are built, the size of the rooms where hearths and other things are built, all of those things come from the Hopi mesas. How to build, if you took a kiva from Homolovi, you could put it in a Hopi village today and it would look identical. The bigger kivas. Nothing has changed in 600 or so years. However, we have evidence of groups also coming, as I mentioned, in the brownwares, coming from the southeast. Some of them came in probably pretty early, in the late 1200s, but probably most of them actually came in later in the late 1200s. So this is an indicator of where people are coming into this area. This is the Hopi mesas. They're coming down. This is the Winslow Homolovi area. Most of the people are coming down from the north, about 60 miles. But another distance, about 60 miles, we definitely have groups coming up in from the Silver Creek area, where White Mountain Red Ware is made. We also have people early coming from the Anderson Mesa area, Peter Pilla's country. So Chavez Pass, if you're familiar with that, or Nuvaquiataca. We see early on that people are trading. So Winslow is kind of central, and it has been for a long, long time. People come to that area. It's a cultural crossroads. They're making cotton, abundant amount of cotton in this area. None of these other areas can reliably grow cotton. So it's a good thing to have and to trade. Late in the occupation, at Chevelon in particular, kind of one of the more eastern pueblos, we have a lot of Salado polychromes. Mostly Tonto, but we also have some Gila. We also have what's called cliff polychrome and some of the later Salado polychromes, along with that Muguillon pottery. It suggests that there was a migration into Chevelon somewhere around 1375-ish, because some of the Salado polychromes are made on local clays, which is the sure indicator that you have a migrant group. When everything about the pot looks exactly like, in this case, a Salado polychrome, and yet it's made locally, that suggests that you have a migrant group. If it was made by local people, they wouldn't know how to do the designs right. It would be like me trying to copy a Picasso or something. We just wouldn't look very good. So we definitely had people moving in late and settling into Chevelon. And this is Chevelon Pueblo. Now, the monograph on Chevelon actually will be out in a month or two. It's going to be in full color. It's going to be produced by the ASM Archaeological Series. So if you want to know more about it, you can purchase that. I wish it had been done by now, but the reviewers are very, very slow. But Chevelon was burned. We excavated 39 structures, but because the site is so vandalized, we could tell where a lot of other structures that were burned were located because they were so disturbed. There was burned material coming out. So at least 20% of the site, which is 100 rooms, were burned. Almost all of them were burned as the last event that took place at Chevelon. So this is a burned corn, a room full of corn. This is a burned roof here. This is the site, huge plaza area. This was built sometime after 1365. This part was built in the 1290s and later. This part was built in around 1325 or so. Big Kiva here. We date this, the occupation of it primarily from the pottery that we find. This is a genital black on yellow in the floor of a room. This is a Sikyatki polychrome, and I don't think I have a picture of that put back together. No. Anyway, Sikyatki polychrome. Sikyatki polychrome began to be made about 1385. So we have it on the floor of this structure, which was burned. So we know that people were actively using Chevelon probably into the 1390s. So we put 1400. I do rounding. Where did the people from Chevelon go? Where did all the Homolovi people go? We're pretty sure that they went back to Hopi. For one thing, they didn't really have a lot of options. This was occupied. Zuni was occupied. None of the rest of these communities were occupied any longer. They'd all been depopulated by 1400. Plus, they have this huge connection between these two areas as represented by Hopi yellow ware. 90% of the decorated pottery at the late Pueblos is Jettido yellowware. 90%. None of that is made at Homolovi. We're talking 100,000 vessels at least. All of it was made at the Hopi Mesas and traded down to these folks 60 miles. So that represents a pretty strong connection between the two areas. People at Homolovi were sending cotton up to the people at Hopi in exchange for the pottery. So that represents a really strong connection. We also know that through neutron activation analysis of the ceramics, the yellowware, that about 2/3 to 3/4 of the yellowware pottery was made in two pueblos right over here, one called Homolovi and one called Kauai. Homolovi is pretty famous. It was still occupied when the Spaniards came through in 1540. A mission was built there in 1629. It was the biggest pueblo on the Hopi, in the Hopi Mesas area in the 1500s. The reason it was so big is because most of these people migrated back there because that's where their connection was, and that's probably where they came from to begin with, most of them. So they went back up to Hopi, and that's quite the end of the story, because after they moved to the Hopi Mesas, they came back and visited their homeland. This is the rock art site at Rock Art Ranch. This is sites that have yellowware pottery on it. Again, it's only made at the Hopi Mesas. The only people living in this area after 1400 were people living at the Hopi Mesas, 60 to 70 miles away. They were coming back to visit this petroglyph site and to collect turtles and other things that are unique to this area for ceremonies that they were performing up at the Hopi Mesas. We know this because when Fuchs excavated at Chevelon and Homol'ovi 1 in 1896, he had Hopi crew members, and they told him that they came down here every year to collect riparian plants as well as turtles and things like that to take back to use for some of the ceremonies, such as kachina dances and things. So we have the physical evidence here of using this landscape. The one circled here is this pot we found. This particular style, it looks like actually a Pueblo I period pottery, but it's actually what we call a Homolovi neck-banded. This was probably made in probably in the 1600s. And it's sitting on top of a 5-meter high dune. And people were probably using it to either collect water to take back to the mesas or to collect plants or other things like that and to take it back. So we have a lot of use of this area continuing up till perhaps 1700, which is when the Spaniards came into the area and began messing everything up, of course. And we've continued that process. So this is our field school, Rock Art Ranch, and hopefully we'll see some of you up there this summer. And I'm happy to take as many questions as we have time for. Thank you. Loom holes in the Kiva? Yes, the men wove.
Is it still the men in Hopi that weave?
Pardon me?
Is it the men in Hopi that weave?
Yes.
How about Tesselado and other areas?
We don't really know. They didn't have looms, and they didn't have kivas or looms. Well, the Salado are actually Pueblo people, so it's very complicated. So the people that were Pueblo people that actually literally migrated down and made that kiva that we saw, those people wove. Yes, those were Pueblo people. But the people they lived with, who were the Mogollon people, In the mountains, there is no cotton because it's too cold. Growing season is good, so they didn't weave. They didn't use kivas. They certainly had textiles, and we don't know who did the weaving of textiles in other groups. Yes, sir.
I'm a little puzzled about the lack of movement from the west end to the east, particularly on the lithic materials. You didn't mention obsidian at all.
Right.
It's quite plentiful as you get a little west of
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I meant to mention that. Out of the 215 points we have, one is obsidian.
Any explanation for why that?
If you go on the other side of Clear Creek, which is, say you go 20 miles west, from that point to Flagstaff, about 2/3 of the points are obsidian. So there was a cultural barrier that lasted for 10,000 years, where those people on just to the west and the people in the Rock Art Ranch area did not trade with each other. They certainly went to the petroglyph area, or the petrified forest area, and they went to the north, but they did not go to the obsidian source. So it was probably being not traded to them for some reason. And it could be that they didn't like each other. They certainly didn't trade with each other. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes, sir.
Yeah, any clue as to what's going to eventually happen at Rock Art Ranch, the ownership and the maintaining it and so forth?
Question has to do with what's going to happen with Rock Art Ranch. Brantley Baird has put in his will that it will go to his 5 children. He has two of his daughters and his grandkids who are involved in continuing to do the tours and things like that. The intent is to continue to focus on that part of the ranch. They have cattle that they raise there. Probably won't be doing that after Brantley stops doing that. But we'll see. They may be open eventually to talking to Hopi or Conservancy or something like that. They very much do not want to have the rock art part of Chevelon Canyon go to any entity who will close it, because they think that would be inappropriate. And that, their concern is if Hopi took it over, that they might close it to the public. I don't know if that's true or not. I've brought Hopi down and they are talking to each other. A lot of Hopi don't even know about Chevelon Canyon, amazingly enough, have never been there, don't know anything about the petroglyphs. So there's an educational process going on right now between the two sides. And maybe something will develop eventually where there will be a partnership or something will take place with that. Because, of course, the Hopi are interested in preserving it, and Brantley is too, and his family, but they may not agree quite on how to do that. So, yes, sir.
Back just briefly to the question of the apparent lack of migration from the west and the obsidian points. Is it possible that the sample size of the points you have is insufficient to really draw the conclusion that there is some kind of cultural barrier between the two regions?
I don't think so. We have 215 points. That's a pretty good size sample. The one obsidian point we have is paleo. And like I said, if you go 20 miles to the west, 2/3 of the points there, because there have been collections of this is mostly coconino forest. Various theses and other things have been done on vast amounts of obsidian. At the Homolovi sites in the P4 period, they're full of obsidian. So in the Pueblo period, there's lots of obsidian points. We find them at the Homolovi sites. We've got probably 100 obsidian points or more. So I don't think it's a sampling problem. I think it's actually a restriction of access to that obsidian that is being maintained by people who have control over that. Why that is, I don't know, but it seems to persist over a long period of time. If it were common, we would be finding them. So I don't think that's an explanation. Yes, ma'am.
What's the repository for these artifacts, and can they be viewed?
The material from Rock Art Ranch will be returned to the Baird family when we're done with our analyses. They have a museum there, and we're doing some interpretive materials for them. They'll have it on exhibit with some of the museum panels and things and posters and things we're doing for them, which will be for visitors that come to it. So they'll have it. They'll curate it. We're also have done some work on state land. That material will remain at the State Museum. We will retain a little bit of the material for further research, but he would like to have it back, and that's our agreement because it is on his land.
So is it open to the public now or not?
It's always been open to the public. If you pay to go on a tour, the materials are there. But the part that we've done has not been put on exhibit yet. We're working with them still on that. But he has other material that's on exhibit there. Yes, ma'am?
I was just going to say, you pay, but when you talk to Mr. Ware, you only pay once. You can go back as many times as you want after that. And he told us, he said, once you pay once to come in, you just tell us and we keep records and you can come back again.
Yeah.
So it's a very generous
Oh, yeah.
way of dealing with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Their passion is to share the history of their ranch, and a lot of the museum they have there is actually on ranching history and the history of settlement of that area, and it's less of a focus on the prehistoric part of it, so that's what we're trying to help them with. The two sites that we're excavating, we're working with them to keep those open. We'll put ramadas over them so that people can see them. They'll be stabilized, so there'll be an opportunity for people to have an understanding of what the prehistoric record is there, because before we got there, all they really understood were the petroglyphs. So we're trying to fill in all of that story for them, and I think we'll have a good story to help them tell. That's what archaeology, this is all a story I'm telling. This is my view of what's going on there. So, don't believe a thing I said. Do you have a question?
Yeah, the kivas that you illustrated here seem all to be uniformly rectangular or square. Some of the kivas that I associate with, like some of the Puebloan cultures, the Anasazi and so forth, are circular. Any reason that you can think of? Was it a functional reason that they were square? Why that distinction?
Question has to do with kiva form. All of the kivas at Homol'ovi are rectangular or square. And that is a fairly long tradition in the western Pueblo area. Starts up in northern Arizona in the probably about 1100 or so, versus the circular kivas that are in the eastern area. I think it probably is partly related to resources, wood resources. Circular kivas take a heck of a lot of wood, and in the western Pueblo area, wood is pretty scarce. So it's a way of preserving those resources. Because they were making circular and D-shaped and square, they were making all sorts of things in the western Pueblo area, but they settled on square. So I think it's partly maybe just practical in terms of preserving wood. Or maybe they just decided that they preferred that style. Don't know. But that's my guess, is it's about as much about wood use as it is about anything else. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, there's also an orientation difference. The western orientation tends to lead to the winter solstice sunrise, and the eastern ones are pretty much north-south, east-west.
Not really. Yeah. The rectangular kivas at Homolovi and others are oriented basically to the south, southeast, or east. They're oriented pretty similarly. It's kind of a pan-Pueblo thing. And when you get into big Pueblos, then it becomes a little more difficult because huge Pueblos begin to constrain how the kivas are built, because they're built basically parallel to the Pueblos. But you are right in terms of the directionality of Hopi. Their directions are solstice oriented versus the eastern Pueblos, which are north-south oriented. So modern Pueblos or historic Pueblos are different. But the prehistoric kivas are not so much different. Shall we give it up here? Okay, thanks.